Hi, everyone. This is Peter Hamilton, and you're watching a documentary business webinar, not from Cannes, from the Quasette, but from Brooklyn, New York. Peter Worsley is joining me today, and we're going to explore the very complex world of music documentary production in the Taylor Swift era. Peter, great to have you on board.
Hi, Peter Hamilton. Great to be here. I really enjoyed our seminar a couple of weeks ago back at MIPCOM, and it was also great to be there and to see a market that's really buzzing with activity and with certain level of apprehension about how the market is changing and the world is changing. But 10,000 people in Cannes really engaging in the way that business is developing, I think is a great place, and reminds me why it's always worth being there, and those serendipitous meetings that you have with people you didn't remember you knew or you just met. It's always a great place to be, I must say, yeah, even in the rain.
You're preaching the gospel of Peter Hamilton and documentary business, but you mentioned our presentation, standing room only. And your topic, the Music Documentary Challenge, keeping the peace between producers, estate stakeholders, and commissioners. And that's what we're going to revisit today. We'll kind of recapture our MIPCOM conversation. And I just want to remind our viewers that Peter has more than 25 years experience in the industry. He has broad experience in production, distribution, co-production, and digital licensing. And his company, and we'll give you the contact later, is Altitude Rights. So, Peter, what are we going to talk about?
So what I thought was interesting, would be interesting today, is to talk about the role of the producer or the production company in keeping the peace. Is obviously a little bit controversial, but in balancing the expectations of the artist, the broadcaster, the music label, the publisher, and the director to create music films which have some editorial independence, but also recognize the sensitivity of some of the issues in the subject matter. And I think most of the takeaways I hope we'll come away with work as much with any films, biographies, celebrity portraits, if you like. And there's been a bit of coverage of this recently with some of the Netflix documentaries, which have been fantastically successful. I'm thinking about Beckham. I'm thinking about the Sly Stallone documentary, which has just come out. And journalists are, they do question the extent to which the creative process is under the control of the management company's branding. And I'm really interested just to delve into that. We're not particularly going to delve into the complexities of music rights clearances. We might touch on that, but more that sweet spot of creativity that we can find where we can work with really interesting artists and subject matters and ensure that we're creating a film which has editorial independence and therefore tells a great story. And I think it also comes at a time that, with the extraordinary success of the Taylor Swift film, I quickly had a check. She's now, that the Taylor Swift Eras tour has now taken over $200 million at the box office, $150 million in the States, $50 million worldwide. It's an extraordinary figure. And I'm also really pleased that if you look at all of the artwork, the trailer, the posters for that, the director, Sam Wrench, has been on all the billing alongside Taylor, which I think is really very impressive from a management perspective. But equally, we have to recognize in a case like that, the creativity, the artistic control has entirely rested with Taylor and her team. And that's normal. And I think concert film directors expect that. In those cases, the production is Taylor's, the show is hers, the music is hers. So it's understandable that the creative control of that film will be in her hands. And that may be one of the reasons that she licensed it directly to exhibitors, AMC in the States and via Trafalgar Entertainment to event cinemas worldwide, rather than going through the traditional studio route. But so
Peter,
that's
our viewer, I was going to say, our viewers are not going to get near Taylor Swift, but many of them will be driven to try and develop and produce programs about lesser artists, but still, popular ones, or to delve into the archive. So what's the secret of working with management?
Well, I think what I often notice, I mean, going back one step from there, what I often notice with talking to producers, maybe starting out trying to work around music themes, is their first port of call is the label. The record label tends to be the most easily approachable. You can very easily find out what artist is on which record label. And so I often find that producers' first port of call is to go and talk to the record label for the artist. And I would advise that that's not always the best route, but let's talk through the occasions where it is or it isn't. I mean, an example, I'm not going to kind of be naming names today, but I was working with a production company who developed a series with a legendary Hispanic artist, and they worked in co-production with the record label to clear the rights to the series. The record label assured them that they had the access to the artist and assured them that they would be able to clear the necessary rights. So the production company does all the work of developing the series, selling it into broadcasters, funding the series, only to find out that actually the record label's relationship with the artist isn't quite as strong as maybe the label thought. And this is often the case with particularly artists who've been around for a while. They don't want their record label to be in total control of all of their rights. Right. So they like to divide up their audiovisual rights from their music rights. Some younger artists, that's not the case. They've maybe signed 360 deals where the record label really controls the audiovisual as much as the audio. But if you're looking at artists who are more what we might call heritage, you would normally find that the record label's engagement with the artist is probably limited to music and much less to audiovisual. Even in cases where the relationship can be very positive, you're still limited. I've produced a series called Classic Albums, which kind of is what it says on the tin. The record label gives us access to the artist's multi-tracks from the original recordings, and we take that apart in the recording studio with the original producers and the engineers and the artists themselves. And one of the challenges of that series, which is one that I really love, is that broadcasters would want us to have a 6-part series that they could broadcast week after week. But the record label are on a completely different calendar. For them, what they're interested in is a film which will be tied into the release maybe of a remastered version of their original album on that commercial timetable. And moreover, what they're interested in is a broadcast which will tie in with that. And it's fairly rare that you may be able to deliver your local broadcaster to broadcast around the dates that the label wants. But to coordinate a global campaign with broadcasters across the world on a specific date is very difficult. And that's often one of the places where record labels and TV producers and broadcasters clash, is the limitations on the extent to which we can coordinate the broadcast dates. So often I would recommend that the record label, you need to be careful with. They can be very helpful. They can give you initial access, but they have a very specific interest, and it's always going to be about the music, not about the story. What they're going to be interested in is how does this help them sell more of the music. So, and the other thing I would also warn there is often a record label's idea of audiovisual content is some form of extended EPK, electronic press kit. So they're often thinking for them, what makes interesting television is a documentary following an artist recording a new album. And as a rule, broadcasters have got very wise to that and recognize that that is a form of promotion, and you're unlikely to get broadcasters queuing up for that kind of film. So again, record labels, broadcasters, producers, we have different expectations, and you need to be really conscious of that when you're starting having those conversations with record labels, I find.
Yeah, different agendas. That's really interesting.
Exactly, different agendas. All that being said, and without going into the details of music clearances, be careful if you're using master recordings of record labels. You will need to clear those unless if you're looking to exploit your film internationally. If you're just making a film for your local market, you can probably get away with a blanket agreement that the broadcaster has with their collecting society. But otherwise, you are going to have to go and clear the master recordings with the record label. And the only way you can get around that is if you're using live recordings, and therefore the masters do not belong to the record label. The second major complicated element in the music documentary is the music publisher. And they have enormous authority and power. And you need to realize that often the music publisher is going to be separate to both the record label and the artist, particularly where you have an artist who's not performing their own songs. So we have an artist who's doing a lot of cover music. You're often going to be in a situation where you have very little leverage with the publisher, because what they're interested in is the exploitation and maximizing the return on the copyrights in the compositions that they own, not in the performance of the artist about whom you're looking to make a film. There are a few cases where it ties together really nicely. I produced a film on Miles Davis, and in that happy occasion, the vast bulk of the masters and the publishing and a lot of fantastic artwork and photography were all controlled by Sony, in fact. And so with the support of the estate, we were able to negotiate an agreement across both the record label and the publisher in one master agreement. But it's fairly rare that you can do that, and often only with artists with a really strong catalogue in one place. And that leads me on to my main point in all this, is that for me, when you're making music documentaries, the key relationship as a producer that you need to nurture is the relationship with the artist management. And in the case, for example, if I go back to the example of Miles Davis, in that case, the artist management actually came to my company wanting to make a film about the legacy of Miles, because there'd been a feature film that they hadn't been pleased with. And we were able to, the key thing was we spent enough time to find a creative team that they were comfortable with and a creative approach they were comfortable with. So I was lucky enough to find a great director, Stanley Nelson, who many of you in the States will know, who is an enormous fan of Miles Davis. And so my job suddenly became really quite easy, because that first meeting with Miles's family, who had been very reticent for a long time to do anything or to permit any film about Miles, they could very quickly see Stanley's, obviously his CV in terms of as a filmmaker and his authority as a filmmaker, but almost more importantly, his clear love and passion for the music of Miles Davis.
Right.
So and Stanley did a tremendous job of nurturing that relationship with different members of the family, and as often it's quite a fragmented family, and he understood the politics and the psychology of the family. I could sit back from that. It wasn't my job to do that. My job was much more to make sure that I could keep the record label, the publisher, and the Miles Davis management at arm's length from that process, so that the personal relationship stayed between the director and the artist. And I think that's the one thing I feel we can try and do, is have the confidence to as a producer, to create a bubble around the creative process of the director and the artist. And as an example, in that case, we had enough confidence coming from the family that we actually only showed them the finished film. I think we only showed them any cut of the film 1 week before it was premiering at Sundance. So they didn't have they didn't have the opportunity to start worrying about it, but B, it meant that Stanley had the confidence to know that he understood their expectations, and he could make a film which was fair and balanced about Miles, which is not at all an easy subject matter. And as a result, they were delighted, and the film is still on Netflix and has been an enormous success. So I think I was very lucky there that I found reasonably quickly a director who was completely in sync with the subject matter and the artists, which isn't to say that he was under their control in any way. And one of the things I reckon I advise against is having a director who's too close to their subject matter. I mean, I once produced a film with a young, upcoming, very exciting artist who won Grammy for Best New Performer a few years ago, and we decided to use a director who was a close friend of hers, who'd been her video director since when she was growing up as an artist, because that would give us a level of intimate access. The trouble was his relationship was first and foremost to his friend, the artist, and not to the film. And we had one very dramatic moment where the artist, as they often do, had stage fright and was scared to go on stage at her big show in the US, her first really arena show in the US. And he, at that moment, put down the camera and didn't film it. So that was, he had never made a feature documentary before, and it's just where his first, and I respect him for that as a person, but obviously as a producer, that was really not the moment that we could afford to miss, because we needed that jeopardy in the film. And he, and probably the artist management, wouldn't have realized the importance of that. So I really think it's making sure that spending time trying to get the chemistry right. And sometimes that's difficult, because sometimes you may meet the artist management, you have very fleeting access to the artists themselves in the initial stages, and you may need to make quite careful judgment as to what's the right team to put around the subject that you're trying to do, and gauge that with the artist management. When that works, you can then work with management to control the relationship with the record label and publishing. Right. So that you can ask the management to help you get the record label clearances and the publishing clearances, as long as the artist performs their own music. And if you can do that, you can help keep your costs under control, and get their support in that complex business of clearing the, clearing the music rights. So that relationship with the artist management, building up that confidence, selecting the right level of director, and being very clear, particularly with management, as to what your plan is. My rule of thumb is I expect the artist management to want to have some involvement in the creative process. So as a rule, I'm happy for them. We probably agree, or we certainly need to agree the choice of director together. I would normally agree with the artist management and the artist what the treatment's going to be. Ideally, beyond that, what I would say is, we will consult with you throughout the filming process. We will show you cuts of the film. If there are any factual inaccuracies, we'll correct them. If the film deviates from the treatment, we will address that. But that we, as the director and the creative team, have the final cut on the film, and you have to respect that process. And sometimes it's difficult. I mean, I find generally in the music industry, people are talking a different language. In filming, we're looking for story, we're looking for jeopardy, we're looking for highs and lows. Often in the music industry or artist managements, they're looking to present their artist in a particular way. And that doesn't necessarily involve the highs and lows. They sometimes want to homogenize a little bit the low points and brush them away. And you need to help artists understand that they don't need to do that, and that the audience engages with the characters much more, where they feel that there's some jeopardy in the storytelling.
You know what I'm hearing from you, Peter, is you've been to what I like to call the University of Hard Knocks about this experience. If I was pursuing a music documentary project that had about a well-established or well-known musician, I wouldn't want to start with a newbie team. You might have a young director or key person or funder, but you really need a lot of deep experience because of the multi-layered expertise in TV production, rights management, label management, etc. It's just a really complex world.
It's complex, but I also think I do really believe a lot of it's actually human responses. I haven't spent all my life producing TV programs. I can surround myself with people who have that expertise. I do think it's being sensitive to the subject matter and to the material you have. And I think one thing I'm always very conscious of, or try always to be conscious of, is that sometimes you need to be humble to the material that you're dealing with. I don't think there's anything I need to hide. I produced a film on Phil Lynott, the frontman of Thin Lizzy, and it was a very sensitive. For me, I found that we had some home movie footage that Phil's widow and children had never seen. And my initial reaction was, when I was writing up the treatment, was, isn't this exciting, exclusive, intimate access? And for me, I was thinking this initially this is great. This will help me raise the money for my film. And then Caro, who is Phil's widow, said, look, you have to understand, this is footage we haven't seen. My children have never seen. My grandchildren have absolutely never seen. And this is very sensitive, intimate material. And it really made me think, and it's happened several times, think we're not dealing with content here. We're often dealing with very personal, home movie footage, material that really helps you understand as an audience the character. But also, I think in being given access to that material, you need to show respect to that. And I think that's why you need to work in those sorts of cases to understand that you have to have a sensitivity to the material. And I don't think it's complex, but it's also it's trying to behave in a human, balanced way with the subject matters that you're working with.
Because so where are we?
Well, the fourth of my kind of chapter headings, and ironically we've left to the last, but in many ways comes first, is the broadcaster or the funder that were whoever's funding the film. And clearly at the moment, there is a commercial demand for big familiar artists and topics and subject matters, and you can find funding for those. I think it's very important that when you're looking to pitch your project, you don't oversell it to a broadcaster. You have to recognize that the access you may get to an artist may be limited because they have very complicated schedules and timings. So don't oversell that, or you'll get a lot of disappointment and have a lot of trouble getting the film signed off afterwards by the broadcaster. Use the authority of a broadcaster judiciously, I think. The broadcaster in many ways has the same goals as the director and the producer do, in terms of wanting to tell a really good story. And they will probably be very supportive of those conversations where the director's trying to push the artist or the artist management to allow elements to be told that maybe they're a little uncomfortable with. And I think you can, if you have a good commissioner who again is experienced and sensitive to dealing with this, he can be very helpful in talking with artist managements, because they have a respect to whether it be a Netflix or a BBC or particularly the American Masters, for example. Those sorts of commissioners who have a lot of experience in dealing with these kinds of films and bring their own authority and gravitas and their own editorial authority, used judiciously, can be very helpful in smoothing out some of those complicated and sensitive editorial issues. And as I say, I think we need to recognize, sometimes it's frustrating, but we need to recognize we're telling somebody's story. And particularly in music, I made a film about Black Sabbath. Those guys have a bit of a past. How you go about talking about their past when they have teenage grandchildren, it sounds silly in a way, but these are true issues. It's understandable that people are sensitive about how their past is portrayed. So I think you'd need to spend the time building out that confidence and making sure they understand that you and the director and the editor are going to deal with these issues very sensitively. Interesting.
So when you go to the broadcaster does have reputation, leverage, as you mentioned, American Masters. So there's a ton of experience there. When you're pitching them a project in this category, can you expect them to solve your problems for you, or are they looking for you to have a really clear path where they'll be able to contribute?
I sadly, I don't think anyone can solve your problems for you. But I think you can pull people in to help, but I think your problems, if they are problems, you need to nudge your way through. And I think it's the producer, supported by whoever the executive producers he's got on board, who are really the ones who've got to get in there and get their shoulder to the wheel. And it's judicious use of a BBC or a PBS or a Netflix is the best that you can hope for, in my experience, and an understanding from them when you go into the project what the limitations may be. Don't let the broadcaster think where everything from extended access that they're not going to get, through to thinking that the artist is going to come up and do a promotional jamboree for them around the release of the film, when that artist is going to be on tour and not have the time that you have. It's managing expectations from the beginning, and sort of having antennae in your head. Often it's on the Friday afternoon where a problem suddenly appears and you completely blindsides one, and it's just taking a deep breath and trying to think through what the solution is for that.
Really interesting, Peter. Your authority and experience really shines through. So let's sum up some big takeaways.
Well,
have I missed anything?
I think it's a juggling act. That's what I've been saying. I think, yes, there's technical complexity. There's it's challenging pitching films and getting them picked up by broadcasters. That's the same across the industry. So we're not really delving into that challenge so much today. But I do think there's a particularly complex juggling act that you need to do as a producer between these big, a broadcaster may be an enormous operation. The record label, again, it could be a big major with a lot of authority, a lot of scale behind them. An artist who sold 100 million records, and you're trying to, you have a little bit of leverage to try and manage these big complicated entities along the way. And I think it's trying to keep that kind of the juggling act working. I think equally the main job you have is to try and protect within that juggling act, trying to protect the simplicity of the creative process at the heart of it, which is giving your director, letting them worry about how to tell the story, and ensuring that you as the producer worrying about the artist management wanting to talk about the scale of their TikTok following in the film, which is not something your director is going to want to talk about, or worrying about how you clear that still or that piece of footage which maybe belongs to the previous management of the artist, and the current management aren't talking to that previous manager, but how important it is that be in the film. That's your job as the producer, and to try and keep the purity of that relationship, if you like, between the director, and hopefully in that way enabling him to have the confidence of the artists themselves is very helpful. And then going back to that previous point, being sensitive to the material you're dealing with, and trying to deal with it and approach it in a humane, sensitive manner. And then around that is obviously all the issues that any webcast about production would be talking about in terms of controlling budgets and timescales. And artists are very difficult. They have very complicated schedules. They go off on tour and suddenly they're not available to be filmed. All of those kind of issues I almost taken for granted in these cases, but clearly that's a big part of your planning, is recognizing how very busy an artist is going to be, and how maybe a final little takeaway would be that when an artist is doing promotion for a new album, is not the best time to try and get them to sit down and give you a 2-hour master interview about their beginnings, because they're going to be on promo mode. So making sure that with the artist management, you're carving out real time with the artist. And if you're not going to be getting that, really thinking hard as to how you're going to be able to make the film. So, it's
all really great advice. Peter will publish the interview on Documentary Business with notes and time codes so that our viewers and listeners can follow. We had standing room only, as I said, at MIPCOM, and the Q&A went on for another 45 minutes after.
Yeah, it did.
But we're out of time. But it's really great to have your experience addressing this, wonderful genre that's just so working so well right now, but still is just so full of challenges. It's great to have you on board.
Great, really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Peter.